What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live in living color from the Radio What studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter? It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, please jump on over to DJLittleRock.com. Come on by. The water's fine. I don't know. If it's a pool party, maybe the water's fine. Check availability and get a free price quote, and maybe you can have me at your next event. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous? Use the hashtag What Makes You Famous and find it everywhere. What makes you smarter? Well, let's find out. Let's do it together right here on the program. Now, on with the show. Today on the program, Mary Ellen Pleasant. Let's find out a little bit more about Mary Ellen Pleasant. Mary Ellen Pleasant was born on the 19th of August, 1814, and she died on the 4th of January, 1904. She was a successful 19th century American entrepreneur, financier, real estate magnate, and abolitionist whose life is shrouded in mystery. She identified herself as, quote, a capitalist by profession, end quote, in the United States Census. She was nicknamed, quote, Mammy Pleasant, end quote, in San Francisco because of the many years she spent in servitude. The press also called her, quote, Mammy, end quote, Pleasant, but she did not approve. Quote, I do not like to be called Mammy by everybody. Put that down. I am not Mammy to everybody in California. I received a letter from a pastor in Sacramento. It was addressed to Mammy Pleasant. I wrote back to him on his own paper that my name was Mrs. Mary E. Pleasant. I wouldn't waste any of my paper on him, end quote. In her autobiography, published in San Francisco's Pandex of the Press in January 1902, she said her mother was a full-blooded Louisiana Negress and her father was a native Kanaka Hawaiian. And when she was 6, she was sent to Nantucket to live with a Quaker woman named Hussey. Mary Ellen attended the Religious Society of Friends before being baptized into the Baptist faith. She worked on the Underground Railroad across many states and then helped bring it to California during the Gold Rush era. She was a lover, friend, and financial supporter of John Brown, and well known in abolitionist circles. After the Civil War, she took her battles to the courts and won several civil rights victories, one of which was cited and upheld in the 1980s and resulted in her being called, quote, the mother of human rights in California, end quote. Let's go through the early years of Mary Ellen Pleasant. Pleasant made contradictory claims about her earliest years, and her exact origin remains unclear. Her birthday is known to be August 19th, but the year is in dispute. Her gravestone at Tulaque Cemetery in Napa, California, states 1812, although most sources list her birth as 1814. The location of her birth is in dispute, with some claiming Georgia. However, she stated in her autobiography that she had been born in Philadelphia. Her writings also stated that her mother was a, quote, full-blooded Negress from Louisiana, end quote, and her father was Hawaiian. In one version of her memoirs dictated to her goddaughter, Charlotte Downs, she claimed she was born a slave to a voodoo priestess and John Hampden Pleasance, youngest son of Governor of Virginia, James Pleasance. In any case, she showed up in Nantucket, Massachusetts around 1827 as a 10 to 13-year-old bonded servant to a storekeeper, Grandma Hussey. She worked out her bondage, then became a family member and lifelong friend to Hussey's granddaughter, Phoebe Hussey Gardner. The Husseys were deeply involved in the abolitionist movement, and Pleasant met many of the famous abolitionists. Moving on in Mary Ellen Pleasant's life, her career and marriages. With the support of the Hussey and Gardners, she often passed as white. Pleasant married James Smith, a wealthy flour contractor and plantation owner who had freed his slaves and was also able to pass as white. She worked with Smith as a, quote, slave stealer, end quote, on the Underground Railroad until his death about 4 years later. They transported slaves to northern states such as Ohio and even as far as Canada. Smith left instructions and money for her to continue the work after his death. Pleasant is in turn by many historians looked to as, quote, the Harriet Tubman of California, end quote. She began a partnership with John James J.J. Pleasants circa 1848. Although no official records exist of their marriage, it was probably conducted by their friend Captain Gardner, Phoebe's husband, aboard his boat. They continued Smith's work for a few more years, when increasing attention from slavers forced a move to New Orleans. J.J. Pleasants appears to have been a close relative of Marie Laveau's husband, and there is some indication that Pleasant and Laveau met and consulted many times before Pleasant left New Orleans by boat for San Francisco in April 1852. J.J. had gone ahead and written back that the area seemed promising for the Underground Railroad. When Mary Ellen arrived in San Francisco, she passed as white, using her husband's name among the whites, and took jobs running exclusive men's eating establishments, starting with the Case and Heiser. She met most of the founders of the city as she catered lavish meals. She benefited from the tidbits of financial gossip and deals usually tossed around at the tables. She engaged a young clerk, Thomas Bell, at the Bank of California, and they began to make money based on her tips and guidance. Thomas made money of his own, especially in quicksilver, and by 1875, they had amassed a $30 million fortune, roughly $647 million in 2017. Between them, J.J., who had worked with Mary Ellen from the slave-stealing days to the civil rights court battles of the 1860s and 70s, died in 1877 of diabetes. Mary Ellen did not conceal her race from other blacks and was adept at finding jobs for those brought in by Underground Railroad activities. Some of the people she sponsored became important black leaders in the city. She left San Francisco from 1857 to 1859 to help John Brown. She was said to have actively supported his cause with money and work. There was a note from her in his pocket when he was arrested after the Harper's Ferry Armory incident. But as it was only signed with the initials MEP, which were misread as WEP, she was not caught. She returned to San Francisco to continue her work there, where she was known as the, quote, Black City Hall, end quote. After the Civil War, Pleasant publicly changed her racial designation in the city directory from white to black, causing a little stir among some whites. She began a series of court battles to fight laws prohibiting blacks from riding trolleys and other such abuses. Harper's Ferry, let's talk about that a little bit. When the abolitionist John Brown was hanged on December 2nd, 1859 for murder and treason, a note found in his pocket read, quote, the axe is laid at the foot of the tree. When the first blow is struck, there will be more money to help, end quote. Officials most likely believed it was written by a wealthy Northerner who had helped fund Brown's attempt to incite and arm an enormous slave uprising by taking over an arsenal at Harper's Ferry in Virginia. No one suspected that the note was written by a black woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant. Pleasant told Davis, quote, before I pass away, I wish to clear the identity of the party who furnished John Brown with most of the money to start the fight at Harper's Ferry and who signed the letter found on him when he was arrested, end quote. The sum she donated was $30,000, almost $900,000 today. suing over streetcar segregation. Pleasant successfully attacked racial discrimination in San Francisco public conveyances after she and two other black women were ejected from a city streetcar in 1866. She filed two lawsuits. The first against the Omnibus Railroad Company was withdrawn after the company promised to allow African Americans to board their streetcars. The second case, Pleasant versus North Beach and Mission Railroad Company, went to the California Supreme Court and took 2 years to complete. In the city, the case outlawed segregation in the city's public conveyances. However, at the state Supreme Court, the damages awarded against her at the trial court were reversed and found excessive. Continuing with the later life of Mary Ellen Pleasant. Later in life, a series of court battles with Sarah Althea Hill, Senator William Sharon, and the family of business associate Thomas Bell, including his widow Teresa Bell and his son Fred Bell, damaged Pleasant's reputation and cost her resources and wealth. Quote, story has it that Mammy kept the feeble, near senile Bell a prisoner in his mansion at the corner of Octavia and Bush, and that she fed his children dog meat and state bread, end quote. Pleasant died in San Francisco, California on the 4th of January, 1904, in poverty. Later in life, she was befriended by Olive Sherwood, and she was buried at the Sherwood's family plot in Tulaque Cemetery, Napa, California. Her gravesite is marked with a metal sculpture that was dedicated on June 11, 2011. Mary Ellen Pleasant did receive some posthumous recognition. Pleasant has been featured or mentioned in several works of fiction. Michelle Cliff's 1993 book, Free Enterprise, is subtitled, quote, A Novel of Mary Ellen Pleasant, end quote, and features her abolitionist activities. The ghost of Mary Ellen Pleasant is a character in the 1997 novel Earthquake Weather by Tim Powers. Karen Joy Fowler's historical novel, Sister Noon, published in 2001, features Pleasant as a central character and Thomas Bell and Teresa Bell as secondary characters. Pleasant has also been discussed in film and television. The 2008 documentary, Meet Mary Pleasant, covered her life, and a segment of a 2013 episode of the Comedy Central series, Drunk History, covered Pleasant's life. Pleasant was portrayed by Lisa Bonet. In 1974, the city of San Francisco designated eucalyptus trees that Pleasant had planted outside her mansion at the southwest corner of Octavia and Bush Streets in San Francisco as a structure of merit. The trees and associated plaque are now known as Mary Ellen Pleasant Memorial Park, which is the smallest park in San Francisco. Her burial site has been designated a, quote, network to freedom, end quote, site by the National Park Service. Pleasant Street on Nob Hill is named for her. That's a little bit about Mary Ellen Pleasant. If you'd like to know more, check out the internet or visit a local library. This has been What Makes You Smarter. If you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. It's Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at Smarter What, and YouTube. Username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me /KeysDan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.